Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. Today, we're joined by Adam Hansen, Principal and VP of Behavioral Innovation at Ideas to Go. He has been leading teams through the creative process with ITG for 23 years, with hundreds of sessions across CPG, financial services, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and other industries. Prior to ITG, Adam led innovation efforts at 3 different companies, lastly at Mars Inc. Adam is co-author of the book Outsmart Your Instincts, How the Behavioral Innovation Approach Drives Your Company Forward, and contributed a chapter to UVA Professor Edward Hess's 2020 book, Hyperlearning, How to Adapt to the Speed of Change. Adam has been a guest lecturer at various MBA schools and has joined a great conversations on top innovation podcasts, which is really exciting. And you're here with us today as well. Thank you so much, Adam.
Michael, thank you so much. I'm always a sucker for this, man. Everyone says, "Do you want to come have a conversation about this stuff?" I'm there.
Nice. There is a very relatively famous, iconic Australian movie called The Castle. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it gives
yeah.
It's set back in the late 90s, I think. So it's a little bit of a classic, and there's a scene in there. He's an ideas man, which. So thank you for joining us on the show, Ideas Man.
I will take that. There are so many worse things I could be called legitimately, so the ideas man is great. I'll take it.
Nice. So what's the most significant thing you're going to share with us today, Adam?
I'm going to share with you that there's some real value in finding the intersection between behavioral science and innovation. We started noticing 15 plus years ago that a lot of the great stuff coming from behavioral science, particularly the work on various cognitive biases, had direct application to what we were doing with our clients. And since we all love innovation, and I suspect many in your audience are there as well, the thought of innovation being unnecessarily difficult haunts me. I just, innovation is where the fun, weird kids go in business. We want everyone who takes a turn through innovation to really get the most out of that. So looking at various cognitive biases, we could see that, hey, we're already, without necessarily having that framework in mind, we're already doing a lot to mitigate the harshest effects of some of these cognitive biases. So for example, negativity bias. Bad is stronger than good in our kind of cognitive and emotional state, being. Negativity bias was just killing too many hatchling ideas before they could even get any feed or sunshine or anything. And we thought, well, we understand why negativity bias evolved and why has been selected for generations, but that's not where we should go to first when we're doing this kind of work. Confirmation bias is the idea that we constantly reaffirm what we already believe to be true. So as long as you're doing that, guess what's not happening? Learning. Status quo bias often was thumbing the scale, making how things were already being done preferred, like the incumbent state of being is always has a lot of power to it. I'm thinking of earlier in my career, I actually did my MBA internship at Kodak back in the day. And this was a company that invented digital photography. And status quo bias, I believe, if you have to boil it down to which cognitive bias caused most of the harm at Kodak, I would say status quo bias is at least a candidate for that. They invented digital photography. They had a war chest of over 20 billion US dollars that could have funded like 5 to 8 really great business experiments to get it right. And they just couldn't do it. And so, they go from a market cap of, their market cap peak was actually in 1998. Most people assume it was like way back in the early 80s or something like that. But between 1998, from their market cap peak to fire sales on patents, you know, that's kind of what goes on there. And then you have, you know, it turns out that One Way Forward wasn't just more of that same thing, but something like Instagram and other things that we've figured out. Kodak could have got there. They just didn't. They succumbed too much to the risks of commission and weren't sufficiently concerned with the risks of omission, which is where status quo bias will take you. But you know, overall, we just like people to consider that being more curious about how we operate and what's going on in the world, and not being so quick to settle on what we already believe to be true. That is important, but at certain times, we kind of need to relax that a little. We need to play a little bit more. We need to try some other things. Curiosity, the scientific term for curiosity is the need for cognition. And when I first heard that, I thought, boy, I get that. Like, I need to know this stuff. You know, I want to go find that out. And so a little more curiosity, a little more kind of scratching that itch for the need for cognition is, I think it's going to tip us toward better opportunities, fresher opportunities. And what we're hunting for is space that is both unique and brings new forms of relevance, because we know that together uniqueness and relevance account for over 80% of all innovation success. So that's really what it's all about. And what our starting point just isn't going to get us there unless we're a little more conscious about some of the choices that we make.
Sure. So you maintain that cognitive biases can undermine innovation. Could you explain why these biases are such a challenge for market researchers and innovators?
Yeah, yeah. I think probably number one is that they're non-conscious. We can talk about them and then we recognize them, but you know, even I've been studying this, you know, diligently for probably 20 years now, and I catch myself daily. So it's not like any of the study has cured me of them. I'm more aware of them when they come up, and I'm a little faster to jump in and short circuit some of these cognitive biases. But they are the echo of 10,000 or more generations, right? We come by all of these very honestly, but they are non-conscious. They are Daniel Kahneman in his work, and particularly in the book Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about system one and system two thinking. And system one is that automatic, reflexive, non-conscious, fast thinking. And that is where we spend most of our time. Whereas that's system one. System two is much slower, more, I like the language of it's cognitively expensive, like it's work. But system two is, it's where we really learn, it's where we improve, it's where we actually can try new things and fail and learn from that and keep going. So just the fact that they're non-conscious, I think it's like having, you know, the enemy in your midst, having sleeper cell agents in your midst that you're not aware of, being exposed to their existence and their true nature can really do a lot for you. The second part of that is that they are deeply rooted. As I said, they are the echoes of, you know, 10,000 or more generations. So they feel comfortable, you know, even if we're not aware exactly what's going on in the, you know, in the machinery in there. They just feel right. They feel good. Negativity bias in particular can feel very responsible, very adult, very businesslike, just shooting ideas down like, you know, we kept weird things from moving forward, you know. But again, under different conditions, how we have been wired and what set us up for success years and years and years ago isn't necessarily going to get us where we want to go to now. Lastly, these biases really harm innovation because there can be social pressure, non-conscious social pressure toward them. So when you hear someone shooting down ideas, unless you're reminding yourself about negativity bias and everything, particularly if it's someone higher in the organization, we tend to do as our ancestors might have, which is, oh, clan elder, yes, thank you. Thank you for protecting us from the scary new. What were we thinking? We won't subject the tribe to harm now because we have these weird new ideas. you
Mm.
know. So it's really those three things, just kind of, they're non-conscious, they're deeply rooted, and there's social pressure uh, toward kind of reifying them. Uh, just, it's good to be aware of this so we can make different choices.
So most people would believe if they were in Kodak's shoes back in 1998, they would have made a different decision, and they would have avoided all of this. But it's all good at saying that in hindsight, but actually being there in person is something very different. They were one of the most successful brands in the world, and in one sense, they were right to make their choices because they'd gone and been so successful. But then they had all of that, the bias there as well. So hindsight's amazing, but you've got to always look back in hindsight, even after a day's work. Like, was there anything of my biases that maybe um, have steered my thinking in the wrong direction, etc.?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, for me, it's about becoming more aware of these, understanding how they tend to show up, understanding how easily, really, once you get a little bit of practice, how easy it is to short circuit them and really and say, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. That's really it. I think the way forward, Michael, is for more of us to become aware of this, of the cognitive biases, what their effects are, why we don't want to go there. But then it's really linking arms and kind of supporting each other as we move forward. The last thing I'd want anyone to do with this work in behavioral innovation is to become judgmental. And to your point, yes, you're actually pointing. There is something called hindsight bias, that we definitely want to steer clear of, and I may have been guilty of that some in teeing it up this way. I say this also that it tugs at my heartstrings because I interned there, and I was there in the summer too long ago. We don't need to bore your audience with how long ago that was, but this was pretty early on, and they already had this really devoted digital photography group already. And so I just think their failure was just not trying nearly enough, despite the fact that they had the wherewithal to do it. They were printing money for years. They had so many assets that were liquid or close to liquid that really could have funded, some real aggressive experimentation. But easy to say that now, easy to say that when I'm trying to make a point.
Mm. I still have a strong sense of the smell of going into a Kodak shop as well. That's gone for
Right?
life now, isn't it?
Well, it's sad, and I feel like when I invoke Kodak, I almost have to say, "Hey, folks, there was a time when," and it's funny, even if you remember some of their marketing communications, Kodak for the times of your life. Well, I think that describes what Instagram has done really well. Instagram for the times of your life. And so it's not like some of those deep needs went away, just the way of delivering on them really, really did. And so for that reason, I just think, if Kodak had even it's easy to kind of say what they could have done, but if they had taken some of that 20 billion, allocated a mere 2 billion to a separate company that didn't have all the constraints that Kodak proper had, where might have things gone? But who knows? That's
Better. Yes. So one of the key biases you address in your book is conformity. In the context of market research, how can this bias hinder teams from generating fresh ideas or discovering breakthrough insights? And maybe
yeah,
what strategies would you recommend to combat this?
wonderful. I think strategy number one is just to, particularly within innovation, most people get the idea that there are these stages, right? You know, um, Roger Martin, great author, Roger L. Martin, who's former dean of the Rotman School at Toronto, wrote a great book years ago called The Design of Business, where he took, many of us are aware of a new product funnel, right? That starts here at the fat end with hundreds of ideas, and then very slowly, slowly you start testing, winnowing down. he said that same funnel approach can apply to knowledge overall. And at the fat end of this is mystery. And I'll tie this into conformity bias here in just a moment. At the fat end of this is the mystery. And then you move along, you discover more, you start to, in the mystery, nobody knows what's going on. It's just like fog. And most people are freaked out by it because humans actually prefer bad news to the ambiguous, right? Because at least with bad news, you can plan, you can do what you need to deal with it. And you can start taking action. But you go from the mystery. I added one step to the model. He went straight from this to the third step that I'll tell you about. But he went from the mystery to that third step. I say there is a kind of an intermediate step called hunch, which is I'm starting to, I think, and maintaining some modesty and humility about it is always helpful, but I think I'm starting to see how certain things are coming together. It's our, in Blink, Malcolm Gladwell talks about how the intuition of experts is actually really helpful. Some people misapprehend his book that just says, hey, intuition of anyone, even, naive knuckleheads can be disciplined, all equally wonderful. No, it's the intuition of people who had seen certain patterns repeat themselves enough times and across enough different use cases, then go, oh, okay, there seems to be a sturdy order of operations here. So in hunch, you start to see some of that come together. The next step then, you're thinning up the funnel. The next step then is heuristics. And so now you're not having to think about everything so much. You have, a handful to maybe a dozen rules of thumb that explain maybe 70% plus of what's going on. They seem to be reliable. They seem mostly to be sturdy in their predictive value. They're not explaining everything yet, but at least you now have a starting point. And then lastly, you get to, Martin calls the algorithm, so now here at the skinny end of the funnel, we now know what things look like. Tied to this whole journey from mystery to algorithm is how we balance validity, which is doing the right things, and reliability, doing things right. Most businesses organized for the algorithm, for doing things right. Reliability, being able to get the same results time and time and time and time again, really important. However, those tools and that way of thinking doesn't really help you so much for the mystery, going back up and saying, okay, things are changing here as we thought they were. The algorithm is good only as long as conditions don't change around it. And well, we don't have that world. That world became a kind of a historical relic. Things are changing all the time. The acronym VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, are just all ratcheted to 10. And so we need to have an algorithm and focus more on reliability only to the extent that the conditions under which they were first a good idea mostly still obtain. But tying back to conformity now, we don't need to worry about agreement so much up to the fat end of the funnel. In the mystery, there's nothing to agree on because we don't know what is going on, right? We need to, if anything, personal inquisitiveness, personal insight, trying lots of different things. That's really what it's all about. And it's kind of like upfront, much more emphasis on validity, or let's figure out how to do the right things and then we'll figure out how to do them right, later on. But you don't, a preoccupation with conformity prematurely, it's not what's, the test of evolution is what is best fit for conditions, right? And conformity is not, everyone should understand that we don't need premature consensus on what we don't understand yet. We need deliberate people taking separate runs at this and learning from that, saying, for a while, we're going to kind of suspend that concern about conformity. Or you can maybe subvert it and say, The conformity we should seek out here is that we're all trying to do this, and we're not all trying to conform. if that's not if that's not too cute for words, but that's we need to be careful about conform, because again, it's, as with all the cognitive biases, it's non-conscious. We are going to succumb to it unless we are aware that doing that at certain times just isn't helpful. It feels good though, right? It feels safe, but we just need to understand that the best thing we can do sometimes in the innovation process is not to conform. Did that kind of get to it?
Yeah. And there's an interesting point that you kind of made around hunches. I guess you could also say instinct. Has
Well,
sometimes
the distinction I draw there, so this gets like super pedantic now. I would say instincts are at the species level. So instincts are what we inherit from our 80th great grandparents and all their descendants and everything. Instincts are selected for over time. They endure because they are fit for those conditions. I would say the intuition is at the personal level. Intuition is, I've seen, even sometimes even just non-consciously, I've pieced together certain orders of operation that seem to explain a lot of what's going on. And so what's good about intuition is when you have non-overlapping pools of confirmation bias. We all have confirmation bias, but it'd be great not to have everyone have the same pool of confirmation biases that they're having to contend with. And then we can kind of be a check against each other. But that intuition comes from having gone to the rodeo, a few times, and just going, oh, okay, I get it. But when we can have enough of us bring everyone's separate intuition, some of which is going to overlap, sure, but there's just a little more breadth in it. There's like, if I can be a little cheeky here, Michael, I joke sometimes with the right clients where doing so doesn't get me in trouble. I say, hey, you notice how we figured out as a species a few thousand years ago that incest wasn't a particularly great genetic strategy? And people laugh and everything. I say, what doesn't that same logic apply to ideas? What if could we kind of lose the tether to incestuous ideas, particularly early on, where the very earliness of it can cast some things in stone and kind of get things going in a particular direction, where that's just not what's needed, So much more experimentation, much more curiosity, much more kind of healthy discontent and just willingness to play, and realize that safety will come at the right point. We're all, no one's gonna, ideas aren't limbs. We're not gonna, you can sever an idea and it's not like severing an arm. We are not our ideas. And so being more nimble with them and using them really only to help us get to a better place is, I think, what it's really all about.
So instincts a good thing then when it comes to innovation with market researchers, or can they sometimes lead us as researchers astray as well?
So we use, and just to make it really clear, what's the connection between cognitive biases and instincts? We're saying the cognitive biases, the 8 that we talk about in our work, and others apply as well. As we go along, we go, well, hey, what about temporal discounting? And what about, some of this other stuff? We're always trying to expand the body of understanding here, but instincts are still very helpful where we're in conditions similar to those under which those instincts first emerged and then were selected for. So negativity bias is mostly in innovation is not great. In moments of emergency, negativity bias is absolutely fantastic, because Barbara Fredrickson's work at University of North Carolina, she talks about how negativity narrows the field of options and impels you toward action, which in a moment of emergency is exactly what you want. And I'm going to go, well, hey, what about this? And what about this? And hey, are we thinking, or what about, and as you're doing that, the emergency is getting worse. And really you ought to be somewhat deliberate about going, guys, we'll have time to do some of that other stuff later. Right now, let's agree. Conformity can certainly come in here at this stage and say, let's get all on the same page. Here are the three things we're going to get to work on now. And we're going to have this chunk done by tomorrow. And we're going to have the next step done by next Tuesday, and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the other emotions that aren't seen as negative, such as hope and just these feelings of expansiveness and everything, they tend to broaden opportunity. They tend to broaden the field of consideration, and they start building. And so you start building more. And so we would say, for the most part, in innovation, we do have, not all instincts that we have are bad, and some maybe can be tapped into. Just be aware of what the need is. Be aware of where you are in the process, and when you ought to just knuckle down and start taking action, and not keep in an endless loop of options. But just it's really being true to what the situation demands. And more often than not in innovation, the situation demands you to be able to take a more expansive view, do some work on it. So we often talk about diverge and then converge. Diverge, come up with more options than you need, start to have thoughts you never would have had otherwise, which you want to get to drive uniqueness and new forms of relevance. But then, don't just keep going. At some point, say, okay, for this wave, we're now going to converge. We're going to apply some strategic criteria. We're going to get smart. We're going to select. Broaden, select, broaden, select, broaden, select. Did that answer your question?
It did. And I think each of us can probably apply this to ourselves in terms of emerging technology that's just out there in the market, just generally. So
absolutely. Well,
so we know.
Go ahead.
Oh, so we know that AI and all of that is surrounding us, and what we need to make sure that we approach that in a way and consider it in each of our roles in the various ways that we can.
Yeah. Well, and there is a binary bias that we can succumb to also, in which we, on anything emerging, we can tend to land in one of two camps: unapologetic embrace and no scrutiny whatsoever, or just dismissing it and going like, there's no value. What are we doing? Those are just toys. These are gadgets. These are gigas. These are just bright, flashy things. And of course, the right answer is to, well, no, check it out, do some experimentation, get some basic learning going on it, but then pull back and then say, okay, given that we are who we are as a company, given that we are who we are as a brand, that understanding ought to lead to some decisions with respect to almost anything that we do. Unlike other companies, unlike other brands, we're not just going to go and do so many things. Really good strategic work is there is some real power, and it sounds like I'm contradicting myself with regard to negativity, but there's some real strength in the right no, and just saying, well, no, here's why we're not going to invest too much time, concern, care on that right now. It's because we have these other things that we're working on. We have these other things that we're trying to do to really make the brand flourish and to really serve our audience well. So we ought to be looking at it, but we ought to curiosity and informed skepticism. So much of doing this right is recognizing the balance of some of these polarities.
No, I like that. And I guess another toolkit you have is behavioral innovation, a unique framework that you've put together as well, which could be useful in such a scenario. So could you perhaps break down what behavioral innovation looks like in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So we spoke a little already some of the biases: negativity bias, confirmation bias, conformity bias. Availability bias is a really important one, which is that we will, when we need to make a decision, we'll often rely on just what's most immediately graspable or memorable. And that may or may not be the right things that we want to have in mind when we're making a decision, particularly a consequential decision of any sort. But one way to think about this, I mentioned earlier, is just like asking yourself, where are we in the process? And I want to share another tool with you. It's not like I'm trying to avoid the point just by introducing yet another framework, but I'm kind of doing. So you may or may not have heard the term the Johari window. It's from psychology. Interpersonally, it's really great tool for, it really is just, the two axes are knowledge and awareness. And so I know certain things and I'm aware of knowing certain things or not, And so that gives you your four quadrants. But the Johari window really, particularly matched up against Roger Martin's steps of mystery and my added hunch heuristic algorithm, that can almost match up with a sequence in the Johari window. And the quadrants in the Johari window then along those two axes are, we noticed that working with clients, particularly at larger companies, our clientele is Fortune 200 type companies in CPG, healthcare, financial services, and others. But we notice that with many companies, there is the square of we don't know collectively what we know individually. And so as we're casting about a new area to explore, Bob can always say, oh yeah, Sally did that study on X 2 years ago. I remember had some really great findings in it, but it's been a while. I don't remember the detail and everything. So starting off, we believe often if you can pull clients together and exploring a new territory, start off with we don't know collectively what we know individually, and actually get some knowledge transfer going and some sharing, and really just kind of build on, okay, what can we put our hands on most quickly? Where are we within our walls in our company? How can we all get up to somewhat of level footing with some understanding here? After doing that, you're in better shape to think about we don't know what we don't know, the unknown unknowns. So that's the square of our knowledge is zip, and our awareness of any knowledge is zip as well. And we don't know collectively what we know individually. The action to take is to expose information. And we don't know what we know. The action is to experiment. And kind of go, okay, well, we at least kind of know the very broad contours of where things could go. So, for example, ethnography. You wouldn't use ethnography typically much later in an innovation stream. Use it up front. You want to get some context. You want to see what's actually going in the moment, right? As we know, for those in your audience who have done ethnography, have been exposed to it, the wonderful thing about ethnography, when done well, is you have a discussion guide or an interview guide that is pretty loose. There are certain things certainly you want, more areas that you want to cover off than maybe some of the specifics. And when if you've done it, you realize that the best questions that can come up during ethnography are those that emerge while you're in the moment, not necessarily those that can be anticipated. You might have some hints, there might be some hunches going on there again, but you want to see, we don't know what we don't know. That's where let's go experiment. Let's spend some time doing that. And it's vital to do that. Let's not short circuit that. After we do that, though, we have a pretty good sense of we know what we don't know, right? And that's where you can start getting then into more obvious kind of ideation, brainstorming, what have you, coming up with lots and lots and lots of ideas, kind of seeing where things go, starting to have specific ideas that you had no reason to have beforehand before doing that kind of work. Really bringing in great stimuli to help you with it, to drive uniqueness and awareness, the unrelated stimuli to help you more with the uniqueness and the related stimuli to help you with new forms of relevance. And then as things come together, diverge, right? That effort, and then converge, get smart, set some criteria of all these ideas that we generated. In our sessions, it's not unusual to generate 400 or 500 ideas. Now, those might not be 400 fully fleshed out ideas, but they're pieces. They could be a feature. They could be a really cool benefit that'd be great for this product to have, et cetera, et cetera. But then you start going on concept development, and through concept development, then now you're going to flesh some of these out. You're going to tee them up in a way that naive consumers can actually, do something with them and respond to them. You set them up to get their best hearing. You communicate them well and everything. But then coming out of that work, then out of the testing on those concepts, then you finally know what you know. And the indicated action for we know what we know is exploit. Really make the most of that now. And hopefully in this effort, you've generated proprietary knowledge that your competition doesn't have. There was the book and the movie Moneyball. It's about baseball. It's an American thing. It's weird, I know. But people asked me for years, like, what I thought was one of the better books on innovation. If this was back in the aughts, I would have said Moneyball, because it's all about generating proprietary knowledge, different ways of thinking that no one else amongst your competitors has access to, even has curiosity about or interest in. And so when you do this right, you're actually working on things that the competition just isn't curious about, or they see as being so onerous that they just go, ugh, yeah, I can't imagine spending time on that. And you kind of go, well, we have reason to believe there could be a really great payoff here. So that's work we're willing to take on. Problems are just jobs, right? So let's pick the right. One way of thinking about innovation is just simply picking the right problems to go to work on, and then hoping then that the competition won't want to bother with it.
So how do you find that, what is that moment where you've diverged and then you're right, okay, we're going to start converging now? When should people make that switch?
Up front, we often do a prep assignment for everyone in the innovation session. If it's a consumer product, we often bring in our panel of creative consumers who are bright, normal consumers, meaning they're not marketing or advertising or product development experts. They have their own jobs, they have their own lives. But they can be really helpful in that co-creating with clients and getting, all of these 400, 500, 600 plus ideas going. We start off with the clients and the creative consumers or other creative experts. So when we're doing healthcare, we have creative doctors who can help us out, right? But we don't go first to what are cool new ideas, but what are the big opportunity spaces? That's kind of back to the Johari window, that space of we don't know what we don't know. That's where you start to slowly pull together with hunch, maybe with heuristics. You start to pull together what you can see as being potentially rich opportunity spaces that would be worth our time to develop specific ideas, within. And so usually we go through it and we get those various opportunity spaces. Again, even with the opportunity spaces, we come up with more opportunity spaces for ideation than we can cover. So we can then prioritize and converge on the shorter list of 4 to maybe 6 different opportunity spaces we're going to go into. And then we set up some really great creative exercises to get everyone thinking about each opportunity space. We just do them one at a time. All of us are doing this now. Here's what we're talking about. Client, here's our summation of the opportunity spaces. What else would you add to that? What other context can you give? And then we give the creative exercise so people can start thinking about that context, that particular opportunity space in a non-obvious way, so that the ideas aren't just right in front of our feet, right? We want to start getting uniqueness going. We want new forms of relevance to start slowly coming together. And so really for us, it's like we have a famous show here called Saturday Night Live. And the saying there was, we're not doing the show because we're ready. We're doing the show because it's 11:30 p.m. You know, so by selecting those opportunity areas up front, we're just saying, look, you could probably do additional work on it. You might do a second wave using some of these starting points to do another wave on that. But the 4 to 6 opportunity areas that we're going to work on for the balance of this ideation session now are these. And we just go, we knock out as many of those opportunity areas, frankly, as we have time for. But usually you can do pretty good justice to a given opportunity area in this setup, within 40 minutes. Sometimes it's rich enough and everyone's still cranking and ideas are coming in, and you might spend a full hour. But usually you can get a pretty good take on it within about an hour. And so in a full day of ideation, yeah, you should be able to knock out easily 4, maybe as many as 6, sometimes maybe even 7 of those opportunity spaces.
Mm. So if we think about this from a market researcher, insight professional, how can they use some of these techniques we've talked about to better forecast consumer behavior?
Great. One thing through this process, all of what we do is rooted in insights. And so even that prep assignment up front, our creative consumers and we work with our clients to get agreement on, when you say insight, is this what you're saying? This is what we're saying. Is that what you, yeah. So an insight should be an understanding of the world that sets the stage. It's not about the product per se. It's some truth that most consumers would acknowledge. You get the spontaneous head nod. That's kind of our test. The real winner for an insight is that it's obvious only in hindsight, right? That's hard to get to, but the closer you can get to obvious only in hindsight, usually the better off you are, because then when people hear and go, yeah, there's something there. Let's look. And this is where everyone's intuition is kind of being called upon. Going after those, using those insights as a starting point for opportunity areas, and just to kind of guide throughout, even when we get into concept development, whether we write it into the concept itself or just have the understanding which insight the concept is based on. We make sure that there is that connection. We always want insights tethered to all the downstream work, because if you don't have that, like, what are you doing? Yeah. And so insights that can be activated that way, that's pretty exciting. That's pretty cool. And a really rich insight can easily point to a couple dozen different specific ideas, right? If the insight is big enough. But again, get to those insights that aren't just so obvious. Everyone goes, yeah, blah, blah, blah. It's just like everyone else, all our competitors understand that as well. What's that doing for us?
Mm. Yeah, it was interesting. My colleague John Bird went to the CRC, the Insight Association conference. It was a couple of weeks ago now, and there was 2 quite interesting panel discussions. One was agencies, and that was followed by corporate client researchers. And just seeing the 2 differences between them, the agencies were really internal focused on what they're doing, trying to get their productivity and effectiveness up. And the corporates were really trying to maximize consumer understanding and then those outcomes as well. So just seeing those 2 things coming there, and yeah, trying to bridge those gaps, really fascinating.
Well, again, for me, what's always interesting about different approaches is getting clear on where are we in the process, what of all the different tools we could draw upon, of all the different frameworks we could employ right now, of all of this, what is most fit? What is, given the conditions that we're mired in right now, which tool just really seems like it's designed for this? I'm pretty handy with tools. I grew up in a family business that had me around tools all the time, and learning how to wield tools in the right way. And look, even sometimes in a pinch, using a tool for a slightly different reason than what is originally designed for, that's also just innovation. That's, if you heard the term exaptation, and so exaptation is using something other than for what is originally designed to do. Supposedly wings on like pteranodons weren't originally for flight. They were for heat dispersal and getting heated up and then being able to manage heat. And I can imagine it was only after enough times of a few pteranodons doing this enough and go, oh, what's going on? I'm starting to lift off the ground. Exaptation is wonderful, but just like Picasso and Dali and everything were first classical artists, and their earliest work is just classically brilliant and beautiful and awe-inspiring. And that's then what allowed them to go on and then try some of the other stuff. So yeah, get rooted in the basics, understand, but just which tool at which time at which point and why. Every research tool. It's easy for marketers and researchers and innovators to get excited about a particular tool and then want to apply it to everything. And you just kind of go, well, okay, give that a shot. Maybe you can learn something there, but have a reason. And that's why I think for us, things like the Johari window, to understand that Johari window is really just us in some ways just going, we have all these tools we can use. Why are we picking one over the other? And it's really getting down to what that particular need is. Where are they in the process? What are the most salient needs right at this time? And so let's make sure we're matching it. We're being thoughtful, and we're not just kind of throwing bright, flashy things at any opportunity.
No, true. So I think one last point to finish on would be a good
You
one.
bet. This is fun. Thank you.
No. So the point is, your book emphasizes the need to rethink what we think, and I think it's a good sort of thought to close on in order to spark innovation. So how can insight professionals apply this approach when they face the challenge of entrenched assumptions or preconceived ideas within their teams or industries? How can we rethink what we think?
Yeah, I would say we try to be really thoughtful about how we hold these different cognitive biases and their remedies together. Some of this was just really testing over, a few years. Is this really what's going on? Or are we just pulling this because man, it'd be cool if that were actually the case. But we would say, look, we talk about 8 cognitive biases in depth. There are more. At one point, our list included like 25 or more. And we just said, well, that's clearly not, that's unworkable. So what's a shorter list? And we got down to 8. What's a list of 8 that we see causing most of the mayhem in innovation, and why? And can we defend this? And we believe that we could. But we would say, look, just start with one. We would say in our book and in most of our trainings we do on this and everything, if we speak at a conference or whatever, we would say always, and this is very categorical, but I'll still defend it, always start with negativity bias. Because until you mitigate for that, it's just going to be hard to get much traction going on the other 7. And so negativity bias, understand what's going on there, understand why we fall for it so much, understand how rational and responsible and adult negative responses sound. And so start there. But I think candidates for kind of those next steps would be, look, availability bias is, I just think, huge. So I'm trying to go to for the least amount of strain, effort, and learning, where can you get some of the greatest outputs? That's what all management is about, right? So inputs and outputs. I would say after negativity bias would be some understanding of availability bias. Because hard thinking is cognitively expensive, we don't want to do it. We're not, we just we need to confront the fact that we are lazy as a species. And that sounds harsh, but that was evolutionarily adaptive. If calories were scarce, you don't want to spend any more time burning calories through hard thought than you had to, right? And so availability bias, the good news there is it does not take that long to pull in other stimuli, things that you would not have thought of before, the right blend of related and unrelated stimuli to help you get to better, richer, more unique and relevant places. After that, certainly confirmation bias, we tend to reify what we already believe to be true, just understanding that. And that's where I love from science the term falsification. And so yeah, you can make falsification fun and safe and not threatening. That can sound very ominous, but falsification is just saying, look, science proceeds because it's easily falsified. Those things that we come to believe, theories we buy into and everything, before the germ theory of disease was kind of the miasma theory, right? That, disease just comes from, bad air. And that's where malaria comes from, literally, mal air aria, but easily enough falsifiable once, people got going on the next theory. So have some fun with your pet ideas. Be willing to, kill your darlings, be willing to, if your pet ideas are sturdy, they will survive attempts to falsify them. But test them, stress them. Ask yourself under what conditions might that not apply quite so well. And maybe some of these new conditions where they just don't fit as well are going to grow. And there may be opportunity there, and we'll want to be ready for it. And so it's really, the encouragement is to be more curious, be more nimble, just be less content to take everything as it is, and realize that we are that strand of DNA that produces amazing Kiwi footballers, as well as, Michael, my second favorite band of all time are Your Countrymen, Crowded House.
Yep, nice.
Don't dream it's over will be played at my funeral. But you see, but you also get like here in the States, Michael Phelps, this guy who has like how many 25 gold medals in swimming, and you kind of go, what the heck is that? You don't see these separate, distinct pockets of excellence in other species. What does that say about us? It says that we are that strand of DNA that can adapt, that can get curious and can go to work and kind of be impassioned about certain things and really create some wonderful, beautiful things. So I'm getting very high-minded here, and I feel like I've been at the pulpit a little too long now, but
No, but if it can help brands and organizations to create things that consumers really want and are drawn to, then we're going to be all the better for it. So thank you for sharing all of these wonderful thoughts, and it's given me some really interesting food for thought, and I'm sure our audience as well.
Right on. Michael, thank you so much. Just a sheer delight. I think you can tell that I'm a nerd for this stuff. Like I'm probably never going to retire, even when one of my colleagues says, "Hey, Adam, you're starting to drool in front of the clients. Can we find something else for you to do?" I love what I get to do. I enjoy what I get to do. And so for me, just being able to do it more and more, being able to employ it in great cause work, come on, that's just what else would I want?
Some positivity bias.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll cop to Michael, you nailed it. You're very astute. I will cop to that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you
Absolutely.
also for everyone else who's listened in today. If you have liked what you've heard, feel free to share it with others as well. I'm sure they'll find this episode interesting. Also, you're welcome to subscribe to the podcast, and we'd also appreciate you leaving a review as well. With that, thank you for listening to Now That's Significant.